Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking into the Delhi Sultanate era. That's from 1206 to 1526 CE. And we're going to zero in on something that I found really interesting in the research, how different religions interacted during this time.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah. From what I see in the notes here, we've got Islam, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism.
Wow, that's quite a mix.
It is. Sounds like a recipe for both harmony and clashes, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's not just about, people living side by side. It's about power dynamics, politics, cultural exchange. It all plays a role. And the sources you've gathered for this deep dive really highlight these complex interactions. I'm excited to dig in.
Me too. Okay, let's start with someone who pops up right at the beginning of our research. Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire.
Okay, Babur.
Yeah, and you've got this interesting note about how he wasn't really big on building religious structures until he got to India.
Yeah.
Then, bam, mosques in Pinapad and Ayodhya. What's that about?
It's a question that's really sparked debate among historians. Some see it as a strategic move, maybe to solidify his power after he conquers Hindustan. I mean, building a mosque right after his victory at Panipat like he did sends a pretty clear message, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. It's like planting a flag, almost.
Right.
But you've also got this note here about the Ayodhya Mosque, built on the banks of the Gubar River, and they actually used carved black stone columns from a pre-existing older temple.
Right, a pre-existing temple from before the 12th century.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's led to some really interesting interpretations. I mean, some scholars see it as a sign of syncretism, like a blending of different faiths. But others see it more through the lens of dominance, like he's asserting authority over the existing religious landscape.
So even something as seemingly simple as what building materials you use can be interpreted in completely different ways.
Exactly.
And honestly, both interpretations seem to hold weight based on what we've got here.
That's what makes this period so interesting. It's not just black and white. It's full of nuance and complexity. And, as we dig deeper into the research you've gathered, you'll see these themes, the tolerance, the conflict, the power dynamics, they all play out again and again.
Okay, so Babur's approach sounds, well, intricate.
Intricate is a good word.
Okay, but then you've also got a ton of material here on Akbar. And he's often hailed as this super tolerant ruler. One source even calls him the Great Mogul.
Great Mogul. Bold statement, right?
Yeah.
Akbar is definitely pivotal. And his approach was, well, it was different from Babur's. He seems much more focused on creating a unified state, a state that draws on elements from different religious traditions.
So like at Fatehpur Sikri.
Fatehpur Sikri.
Yeah. You've highlighted this amazing palace complex here with mosques, Hindu-inspired elements, and even spaces for philosophical discussion between different faiths. It's just amazing to think about all these different groups coming together to actually, debate and exchange ideas like that.
I know. It's hard to imagine that happening today, isn't it? And it wasn't just the architecture either. He abolished the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims, and actively encouraged interfaith dialogue.
Wow. That's so progressive, especially for that time.
It really is.
But wait, you also have another source here, and it argues that Akbar's moves weren't totally about genuine religious tolerance. It suggests it was more about, well, consolidating his power and centralizing his authority.
That's the debate, right? Was it genuine tolerance, or was it a really shrewd political strategy? Or maybe, and hear me out, maybe it was both.
It's fascinating that we have these competing interpretations.
It is. Your sources do such a good job of highlighting that.
This is where it gets really interesting to me. I was looking at some of these architectural details that you highlighted. Things like trabeited structures, which are actually more common in traditional Indian architecture. And they're popping up in Akbar's Fatehpur Sikri.
Right.
And then you've got the sharokas, those ornate balconies where emperors would appear before their
subjects. The sharokas.
It seems like there's this visual parallel between, a king addressing his people and a deity being worshipped in the temple. Am I reading too much into this?
Not at all. Scholars have actually pointed to these details as a way of blurring the lines between religious and imperial authority. Like they're using these architectural elements from different traditions as a way to visually connect the emperor's power to something divine, appealing to a wider range of people.
So these choices of architecture, could they have actually influenced how people viewed the emperor and his authority? Could a building really shape people's beliefs?
That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of how power was projected and perceived during this era. We can't know for sure what was going on in people's minds back then, but we can look at the choices these rulers made and think about how those choices might have been received by their subjects.
It's like we're working with this giant puzzle, trying to piece together motivations and impacts.
That's a great
And
analogy.
all these architectural details, they're like pieces of this puzzle.
Exactly. And as we go deeper into your research, we're going to uncover even more pieces. It's amazing how these rulers were using symbols and architecture really to project their power.
Right.
But you've got some sources here, and they suggest it wasn't just about, top-down control.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it seems like ordinary people were finding their own ways to kind of navigate this diverse religious landscape.
Are you talking about the Bhakti movement?
The Bhakti movement is
I highlighted it in my notes because it just seems so different from these really formal interactions we've been talking about.
I know, right? The Bhakti movement, it really emphasized this personal devotion to a deity,
Mm-hmm.
and it gained a huge following across India.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is, well, it often transcended these traditional religious boundaries.
Yeah. I remember reading about Kabir. He was a Bhakti poet, and he totally rejected rituals and hierarchies. He seemed more focused on like a direct connection.
Kabir is a great example. He drew from both Hindu and Islamic traditions. Wow. And he challenged the idea that these faiths were, mutually exclusive.
Right.
And his poetry resonated with people from all walks of life,
It did.
which suggests there was a real hunger for this kind of like inclusive spirituality.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the Bhakti movement was like a parallel current running alongside these big architectural projects and all this political maneuvering, right?
Precisely. It represents this more, personal and experiential dimension of religious coexistence.
Yeah.
And it was driven by the beliefs and practices of, ordinary people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But it also makes me think about, well, the limits of tolerance. I mean, were there instances where things just kind of broke down, where the conflict just overshadowed coexistence?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, religious violence, it was a reality during this period.
Right.
You've got a source here that recounts the destruction of temples during conquests, often as a means of asserting dominance and, suppressing other faiths.
That's a tough reality to face.
It is. It reminds us that even with these attempts at harmony and cultural blending, the power dynamics and the religious tensions could still erupt into violence.
So how did societies try to, regulate these interactions? I mean, did the Delhi Sultanate have specific policies for dealing with all these different religious groups?
They did, and it seems like they were constantly trying to strike this balance between, pragmatism and Islamic principles.
Right.
You highlighted the jizya in your notes.
Yeah, the jizya is a tax levied on non-Muslims, right?
Yeah.
It seemed like a pretty clear way to, mark the difference between Muslims and non-Muslims in the Sultanate. But I did read in one source that it was also a practical way to, fund the state.
Mm-hmm.
And it exempted non-Muslims from military service.
Exactly. So it was this way for different communities to kind of contribute to the Sultanate, but in different ways.
Right.
But it was also a source of resentment for some, which, shows how even seemingly practical policies can get entangled with religious tensions.
Yeah, it sounds like navigating all these religious differences was a constant challenge for the Delhi Sultanate.
Absolutely. I mean, they had to juggle all these competing interests, try to maintain stability, uphold their own religious principles, all while managing this incredibly diverse and dynamic population.
This is really helping me understand just how complicated this period was. We've gone from these grand architectural statements to these incredibly personal expressions of devotion. And we've even touched on these dark realities of conflict and discrimination.
It reminds us that the past is never simple. It's like this tapestry woven from all sorts of experiences, harmonious, tense, joyful, tragic. And to really understand it, we have to look at all those threads.
And speaking of threads, one we haven't really pulled on yet is, well, the role of gender. How did being a man or a woman shape how people experienced religion during this time? I did find some sources that mention Sufi traditions and how those provided spaces for women's spiritual expression.
That's a great point. Gender dynamics definitely influenced religious life. And Sufi shrines especially, they became really important gathering places for women from different communities.
Yeah. I read that they offered these opportunities for women to, connect with each other, participate in religious activities, and even gain some level of social and economic independence.
It shows that even within, patriarchal structures, women found ways to make their mark and create spaces for their own spiritual growth.
So even though we're talking about these big historical trends, we can't forget about the individual human stories, right?
Absolutely. And you've done a fantastic job of gathering sources that capture both, the big picture and those individual experiences, because it's through those individual stories that we can really connect with the past and understand its complexity.
Okay, so we've seen how rulers projected their power, how ordinary people found ways to express their faith, and even how gender played a role in shaping religious life. What else is there?
Well, in our final segment, we're going to shift our focus to the legacy of the Delhi Sultanate era, and we'll look at how these cultural and religious interactions continue to resonate in the world today.
I'm ready. This deep dive has already been such a journey.
I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Okay, so we've talked about so much, from mosques and palaces to these really personal expressions of faith. And now we've got all these sources about the legacy of the Delhi Sultanate. What really jumps out at you when you look at all this?
Well, one thing that's really striking is how the Sultanate's patronage of art and architecture, it really led to this incredible fusion of Islamic and Indian styles.
It's true.
It's like a visual representation of all these cultural exchanges we've been talking about.
You know what? You're right. I actually went to the Qutb Minar in Delhi a few years back.
Oh, nice.
It's amazing. It's this towering example of Indo-Islamic architecture, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site now.
It's incredible, isn't it? A structure built centuries ago, and it still draws people from all over the world.
I know. It really speaks to this enduring power of these cultural blends. And it wasn't just architecture, right? I mean, your notes mention music, literature, even cuisine, all being shaped by this fusion of cultures.
Exactly. Think about Mughal cuisine.
Oh, yeah. Good example.
It developed later, of course, but it's this amazing mix of Persian and Indian flavors that people enjoy all over the world now.
It's a delicious example of how these cultural interactions, they really did leave a lasting impact.
They really did.
It's amazing to think about how those historical connections are still with us today. I mean, even in something as basic as what we eat. But your research also points out that it wasn't all just harmonious blending. I mean, the Delhi Sultanate era also saw these distinct religious identities emerging.
Right, that's important to remember. The formation of the Sikh faith, for instance, that was in part a response to all these religious dynamics of the time.
Oh, right. Guru Nanak, he was the founder of Sikhism, and he preached this message of universal brotherhood, challenging both Hindu and Muslim orthodoxy. It's a powerful example of how new faiths can emerge in these complex religious landscapes.
And that Sikh emphasis on inclusivity and social justice, it still resonates with millions of people today. It's a legacy that goes way beyond the historical context.
So the takeaway here is that the Delhi Sultanate's legacy is multifaceted. It's about these cultural fusions that we see in art and food, but it's also about, distinct religious identities emerging and new ways of thinking about faith.
Absolutely. These historical processes, they're rarely straightforward. They often involve, both integration and differentiation, a really complex interplay of forces that shape societies.
And recognizing that complexity is so crucial for understanding, not just the past, but the world today, right?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, all the issues we're grappling with now, religious diversity, interfaith dialogue, the legacies of colonialism, they all have roots in these historical interactions.
Wow, this has been such an amazing journey. We've explored so much, from the grandeur of these mosques and palaces to the, really intimate beliefs of individuals. And we've seen how all those dynamics, they still echo in the present.
It has been a privilege to dive into this fascinating period with you. It's so clear that you've put together this incredible collection of sources. You've given us a real understanding of the richness and complexity of the Delhi Sultanate era.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, your insights have been amazing. They've really helped me connect the dots. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of this period now.
That's what the deep dive is all about, guiding you through your own research and helping you uncover those aha moments.
Mission accomplished, I'd say. And for anyone listening out there, remember that history, it's not just about the past. It's about understanding how we got to where we are today and using those insights to build a better future. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep into this amazing tapestry that is human history.
Beautifully said. Until next time.